Welcome everybody. Thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar. Welcome also to anyone joining us via Facebook. In a few minutes, I'll introduce today's speaker, but first I want to tell you a little bit about the Martin Center. Since 2003, the Martin Center has been a voice for excellence in higher education. We're dedicated to promoting knowledge over credentials, restoring genuine liberal learning, and ensuring that public investment in higher education provides value to students, taxpayers, and society. Specifically, we advocate transparent and responsible governance because we believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant. Viewpoint diversity, because liberal learning can only take place in an environment of vigorous debate and open inquiry. We advocate academic quality, because the future leaders of government, industry, philanthropy, and private civic institutions will likely come out of our universities, and we want them to be up to the task. We advocate cost-effective education solutions because we know that resources are scarce. And we advocate innovative market-based reform because there are multiple pathways to learning, some that haven't even been invented yet. I want to give you a few logistical notes about our presentation today. First, we're recording this presentation and it'll be available for you to watch and share by the end of the week. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box and you can add a question at any time. I'll pose the questions to Jay after he finishes speaking. If you're joining us via Facebook, you can put your questions in the comments section. We'll be monitoring Facebook to make sure we see your questions and get to them as well. And if you want to follow up after the event, you can reach us at info@jamesgmartin.center. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's speaker, Jay Schalin. Jay joined the Martin Center in August 2007. A Philadelphia native, he began his writing career as a freelance journalist for the Asbury Park Press in New Jersey and wrote for several other papers in New Jersey and Delaware. He also worked as a software engineer for Computer Sciences Corporation. Shallin has a BS in computer science from Richard Stockton College in New Jersey and an MA in economics from the University of Delaware. His articles have appeared in Forbes, The Washington Times, Fox News Online, U.S. News and World Report, Investors Business Daily, Human Events, and American Thinker. His op-eds have been published by the McClatchy News Service and Raleigh's News and Observer. He has been interviewed on ESPN, National Public Radio, and UNC TV, and his work has been featured on ABC News and Fox News, The O'Reilly Factor. Shallin is a member of the National Association of Scholars and is on the board of directors for the Academy of Philosophy and Letters. And with that, I will hand it over to Jay. Thank you, Jay.
All right, thank you, Jenna. And I hope I don't bore anybody. After all, the topic is board governance, which is probably not the sexiest topic in the world. I started this report with an assumption about academia and academic governance. And after my, 13 years in this job, I kind of believe that academic governance is dysfunctional. Now, the most glaring problem I see in all of academia is one framed, Jonathan Haidt, who's a social psychologist at NYU, framed it as the truth versus social justice problem. And the pursuit of truth has long been considered academia's main goal or aspiration. In recent years, that's changed quite a bit. And individual scholars and departments have been moving into the social justice camp for a long time. And now we're starting to see entire universities doing it. And all of this is producing ideas that are antagonistic to America and Americans. And it's sort of a perverse state of affairs to have an institution so at odds with the society and traditions that produced it. And I don't see how this can last forever without tyranny of some sort. It's either the educational institution has to match the people or something has to give. And I think that some small percentage of the people have realized this for a while. And I think more recently, especially with all the unrest this summer, we're starting to see some signs that maybe the middle third is starting to grasp it. And I don't know if it's too late. I have some reservations about saving higher education. And this has been allowed to happen because nobody in charge has had any interest in stopping it. Now, when I started researching, I did the first thing that most people do. I started to look at current practices, and I found they don't illuminate at all. Most literature on governance does not share the perspective that higher education is deeply troubled. Most of the people writing about it are pretty satisfied with the status quo. I read a whole lot of this stuff at first, and my eyes glazed over, and it always seemed like they were discussing whether trustees should wear ties with stripes or ties with polka dots. That's about how deep they got into things. And this report is not that. It's about addressing massive problems and calling for major reform. And since I couldn't work from existing practices, I tried to get down to the basic incentivizing level. Now, I find there's two main questions concerning academia's sort of dysfunction. Why is this happening? And can something be done about it? And I'll spend quite a bit of time on the first. When an institution is struggling on so many levels, the problem is just about invariably one of leadership, which is governance. The dominant form of governance in higher education is called shared governance. Now, for those who are unfamiliar, you have three main stakeholder groups, the Board of Trustees, the administrators, and the faculty. And each is given control over their own sphere of activities. They can influence the other stakeholders' spheres, but in general, the faculty has control over the curriculum, hiring, promotions, coursework, that sort of thing, grading. The administration tends to focus on operations. They control communications with the outside, and they also are the place where information flows through on the inside. And the trustees pretty much have been resigned to having control over the finances, but at least in public universities, they seem to even yield to the administrations on that. Now, the shared governance is not exactly the legal sort of thing that you see in charters, statutes, major court decisions. It's sort of evolved in practice. And one of the things that has influenced is the principle of soft governance. To explain that, let's say there's also hard governance, which is the actual rules, statutes, etc. Let's say the hard governance says all employees have to fill out Form X. And a lot of the employees look at Form X and say, I'm not wasting my time filling this out. And they don't. So they've just negated the hard governance by just not doing it. And there's a lot of that goes on in higher education. And there was no single act that created shared governance. It's kind of the result of countless decisions over 150 years. You can include things like collective bargaining, tenure, and things like that they are sort of legal contracts, and because they're legal contracts, or at least considered by some parties to be legal contracts, they sort of interfere with the fiduciary responsibility of the trustees. And so why is shared governance so damaging? Well, for one thing, it was designed to reduce the board's leadership abilities. There is no real clear chain of command. The buck sort of stops nowhere in a lot of cases. It's based on consensus building and majority kind of mood. And as a result, higher ed runs on a lot of manipulation, horse trading, secrecy, and intimidation. shared governance intentionally clogs the gears of the university. You have a lot of mid-level people making high-level decisions for themselves. And when a system needs reform, as academia does, a top-down hierarchy works best. You know, it's sort of like when the barbarians are at the gate, it's not the time to discuss the perfectly ethical system of governance. And it allows the direction of the institution to be set by the wrong people with the wrong incentives. For an example, the board has a fiduciary duty to ensure quality education. The administration, though, has no such legal constraint. They only have incentives. And their incentive is to make sure the school has a good reputation. And reputation and quality education are not necessarily the same things. The administration and the faculty both have asymmetry of information advantages over the board. The board is a bunch of part-timers who stop off at the campus a few hours a month. The administration and the faculty are intimately involved with what goes on every day. You also have a lot of careerism. The faculty, they have incentives for research and getting free time over teaching, which is kind of a distortion. Another big thing, particularly for the administration, is because they desire reputation to be high, they try to avoid all controversies. And one way to avoid controversies is you gloss over problems until they become too big to avoid. And that's one of the big problems with governance in higher education. Now, it may seem alarming to a lot of people to end this. I mean, it's all people alive today have ever known. And it's always seemed like it's the natural and traditional way to run higher education. But in reality, the first 250 years in this country, since Harvard started, I guess it was in 1636, colleges and universities were board-centered. Boards are the one with the legal status of they're in control. They either are in the charters, they are declared the owners of the university in perpetuity, or through the electorate and the legislature, they are given the highest authority. They also, once again, have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the mission of the university is achieved. Now, and furthermore, other stakeholders, such as the administration and the faculty, the only power that they have is delegated to them by the board. Without that, they have nothing. Now, and furthermore, one more thing about the faculty, court decisions have consistently affirmed that they are employees, not officers of the corporation, as they sometimes insist they are. Now, shared governance developed largely because of a certain, of the need for expertise at one point. In the late 1800s, the specialization of knowledge reached a point where board members no longer could directly quiz graduates to make sure they learned enough. In the old days, the curriculum was fairly narrow, and so the trustees were usually familiar with it. With the specialization and increase in knowledge, that was no longer possible. So it was assumed that decisions about the curriculum had to be made now by the faculty. Now, there's a big problem with expertise as the criterion, and that is that it is prone to tunnel vision and groupthink. Expertise tends to be to drill down and to be very narrow. And furthermore, people who are part of the expertise group, people who have a certain knowledge, tend to disregard anything not created by themselves. Now, I believe this is wrong. The societal level is the proper one for fundamental decisions, not the narrow expertise level. It is up, and the board is the one that is connected to the outside world, to society. They are involved in many different things like business, politics, other professions. So that's better for declaring the fundamental direction, intellectual direction, and for making sure that the university, especially a public university, provides service to the community. There's also been a lot of changes in higher education over the last 150 years. One is the nature of academic freedom. It used to be that academic freedom was threatened from the outside by the government, by boards, and by churches. Today, the threat to academic freedom tends to come much more from the inside, from the faculty and from the administrators. Furthermore, there are many more stakeholders than there were in the past. Today you have different independent centers. You also have lots of research partners. And so you need somebody who can do a big picture, look over the whole thing rather than looking in one narrow area. The board is less prone to groupthink than the faculty and administrators. There's a lot of turnover in the board. Boards are open to outside influence, and for them it's a secondary function. Their identities are not tied to academia. And I'll talk a little bit more about this groupthink phenomena because it is so prevalent in a lot of academia. And the dictionary, or the one definition one person used, is the striving by a group for unanimity instead of accuracy in their appraisal. And it tends to produce sloppy, extreme, and close-minded thinking. It's especially because it's not tested by outsiders. And academia is extremely susceptible to this. First of all, higher education attracts ideologues looking to spread their ideas. Departments are self-perpetuating. The department members choose who is to join them and who is to succeed them. And there is a natural attraction or a natural incentive to hire those who agree with us and those who will help promote our own ideas. And I look at some of the more extreme hires in the UNC system over the last few years since I've been working here. And there's a gentleman by the name of Dwayne Dixon. Dwayne Dixon is an archaeology lecturer over at UNC, not archaeology, anthropology lecturer over at UNC Chapel Hill. He first comes to public notice during the Charlottesville riot. He claimed to have threatened with a rifle the guy who eventually drove his car into the crowd and killed a woman. Now, when he was actually had to testify in court, he denied that. He said it must have been somebody else. So either he committed the act or he lied. His next big thing was he was arrested in Durham for waving around a gun at a protest, which is against the law. He heads a local chapter of an organization called the Redneck Revolt, which is an an anarchist militia that promotes violent takeover, if necessary, of the country. He was hired to teach at UNC Chapel Hill, and then he was later arrested for assaulting a reporter at a protest over Silent Sam. Another name is Alex Portego, an English teacher at UNC Wilmington. His research before he was hired was mostly obscene poems dedicated to a kinky porn star. He also, his doctoral thesis was on hip hop, and he was hired over, the department chair bragged that he was hired over 100 people. And I can't imagine all 100 of them having that kind of baggage. But this is the kind of thing that goes on. Activists tend to dominate faculty governance and hiring committees. The most aggressive people get on those committees and they hire people. So these people are not being hired in spite of their outrageous behavior. They're being hired because of it. Furthermore, bad social ideas are not tested quantitatively the way bad economic ideas get tested. There's no profit and loss statements. There's nothing governing opinions. You have the only measures, such as journal publications and citations, are measures of popularity, not truth or efficiency. And groupthink is a dynamic process. Once an imbalance occurs, continuously greater imbalances occur until unanimity is achieved. We can use the voter registrations to show how this drifts. One study says that in the social sciences and humanities, in 1972, there were 4 Democrats for every Republican. The most recent study in 2016 says that imbalance has increased to 11.5 to 1. And that doesn't even tell the degree of radicalization that occurs. Now, when all this happens, dissent disappears. The natural human behavior is to avoid confrontation on the job. And there is the personal ambition of people, especially those aspiring to become administrators, to avoid controversy with their peers. There are also impediments to good governments coming from the outside, such as Title IX, state and federal government agencies, the media. The one I focus on in the report is accrediting agencies. They tend to be highly distortionary. For one thing, they have a dual mission. They are not only the gateway to federal funding, but they have a traditional mission of getting colleges and universities to improve. Because they can dangle like federal funding, such as financial aid over the head of schools, they can pretty much bend schools to their will. And we're starting to even see things like demands that schools adopt social justice practices. And there's a real problem here because their ability to dangle federal funding as a carrot or a stick can conflict with the fiduciary responsibilities of the board. And the board is almost forced to back down because the school can't do with all that money. There's a lot of conflicts of interest involved with accrediting. The member organizations, that is the universities, provide the funding. That's one problem. Another is a lot of the examination of universities and colleges in the accreditation process requires a peer review. And the peers are from other universities. So you can kind of have this log rolling, you accredit me, I'll accredit you. And so big problems there. And especially important is it's totally ineffective. It doesn't ensure quality education. Mostly what it judges is finances. And that's very redundant. There's state agencies and other agencies that look after universities' financial status. Now, the board also has some issues. Board selection, it can be a problem. People are policy. And at public universities, if the politics of the state are good, there is hope for reform because they'll appoint good trustees and governors. If not, there's not much hope for reform at all. The private universities tend to be largely self-perpetuating. And if a board's gone bad, if they've gone in the social justice direction or something like that, well, they're just going to perpetuate with other like-minded people and no reform is going to occur. The big hope here is for some sort of alumni elected board in which the alumni operate independently. Often they don't, though, because the administrations tend to have a great influence and great control over alumni organizations. And I think one of the keys is the asymmetry of info problem, and that is for boards. The administration basically can tell the boards whatever they want, and the boards have to operate on that. And that is just a bad way to do business. Another thing that I think kind of should go on is a lot of times it's suggested that the board chair work closely with the school president. That can be a bad if the administrator can manipulate the board chair, that's a big problem. So I would like to see more separation there. And I also think you want to avoid controlling cliques that are appointed by the chair. If the chair can appoint all the members or all the chairmen of committees, you can have a big problem. Another thing that I really find it can have a big effect would be for boards to stop considering, board members to stop considering themselves to be advocates rather than overseers. This is how the board members are trained at the UNC system. And if you think about it, an advocate is somebody who presents his organization or her organization in the best light. They kind of want to sweep the problems under the rug. An overseer, however, is somebody who tries to look at the big picture and notice the problems and deal with them. I also think that boards, I want to see as many people as possible outside of higher education. It's just, there's just almost too much inbreeding of ideas that goes on in academia. Now, of all the solutions, my personal favorite might cause some heads to explode. And that is, I believe that all university trustees, officers, and employees should be required to take a loyalty oath. Now, in academia, that certainly conjures up images of McCarthy and anti-communism, but I don't want that kind of loyalty oath. Instead of mandating allegiance to any particular ideology or religion, they should take an oath to the pursuit of truth and the free expression of ideas. And I think that will give that will give the powers that be an extremely strong weapon against indoctrination if it's enforced. Two other of my solutions stand out for their, both for their importance and potential for reform. And the one that I've been championing this for a while, that I consider to be the most important, is to give boards a high-level staff member answer only to them. And they should be a policy expert. And this solves two major problems. It ends the asymmetry of information advantage that the administrations have, and it takes over, and this policy person should take over the training of trustees and make them aware of their own powers and duties so that they will perform them. I think that that would make many trustees much better than they are today. And something that, another solution, something that's sort of connected is I want to bolster board oversight over the academic side of operations. And I'll give an example of Stephen Salida, who was, he was hired by the department, one of the departments at the University of Illinois hired him. Then it came out that he had these tweets like praising people for kidnapping Israeli teenagers and killing them, and a bunch of other kind of vile opinions that he'd expressed over the years. Now, the Illinois board had this provision that they have to approve all hires. And they almost always rubber stamped them. I mean, they hardly looked at anybody. But in this case, there was some publicity. They rejected the guy. And so the school was able to avoid making a very big mistake. I also want to increase the power of the alumni. I mentioned that. And I want to finish with saying that there's really no magic bullet. I question whether all colleges can be saved. A lot of the prestigious private schools are insulated from any outside influences by their prestige and endowments. At the publics, you do have the possibility of pressure from voters trickling downstream to the board and to the legislature. At the lesser prestigious tuition-driven privates, they have a different set of problems. They're trying to keep their doors open, largely. And so they are very open to reform, I think. But if higher education is going to be saved, strong leadership is needed. I love higher education. I have three degrees. I may get a fourth. I love it for what it has been and for what it is supposed to be, not for what it is becoming. And dramatic change is essential to keep it from becoming an instrument of falsehood and tyranny. And that change begins with board governance. And that's all I have. Thank you. And I guess I'll kick it back to Jenna.
Thank you. And so I will get to those right now. I will start with a question from Ed Geringer. He says, aren't faculty, especially conservative faculty, better off if the power of the board is limited? In private universities, leftist chancellors appoint the board. In blue states, leftist governors and legislatures do. If the board had absolute power, they could fire the few conservative faculty who do exist.
I would say, I've thought about that a little, and sometimes you may have to, I don't know how we can save conservative faculty in public universities in leftist states or the prestigious private colleges that are totally dominated by leftists. What they're hoping for, I guess, is to be saved by personal relationships. But the problem of groupthink, I mean, I was speaking to a history department in a prestigious public university, and he says, I'm the last one left. yes, his tenure is protecting him, and the fact that he's close to retirement age is sort of protecting him. But once he's gone, he's gone. There's nobody else in his department that's going to be a conservative. So I don't know, as this groupthink thing progresses, as it goes from 4 to 1 to 11.5 to 1 to 20 to 1, I don't know how much saving can be done. I mean, I know that's depressing, Ed. I'm sorry, but I think that not all things can be accomplished.
So Ed has got a follow-up for you. He says, no, they're not hoping to be saved by personal relationships. They're saved by contractual obligations,
Yes.
like in the court case, like McAdams versus Marquette. So, tenure.
Yes.
You can comment on that.
That is it. Yes. The contractual things certainly keep them alive, or at least in their jobs. And that's a good thing. I don't want to have contracts that remove academic freedom. I think that there also can be greater academic freedoms introduced into the literature and the policies of a university. I'd like to see more of that, using the court cases like McAdams as a background, and make the policy area much stronger to protect people for their ideological beliefs.
We actually have a question kind of on that same topic that just came in, a question from Robert Thomas. Can conservative faculty not be saved by federal legislation protecting faculty from being fired on solely political grounds?
I believe, certainly, I'm sure they could. Is the federal government going to do that? I know that Trump threatened a little something, but that's a threat. Okay, now, but we've also opened up a big can of worms there, in that now we're starting to hand over the academia to the federals even more. And I don't know whether we want to go there.
Okay, so let me start going back in order now that I've gotten the kind of that line of thinking. So one question comes in from Julia Arns asking, do you think that everyone deserves access to education?
Everybody deserves access to education. Now that can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. I believe that everybody should be able to go down to their local community college and if they have money, community colleges are open admissions. They can, if they're poor, they can get financial aid. If they, if they have the money, they can pay themselves. So there is universal access to education. Now, does everybody get a Cadillac, living on campus at some top college? No, there isn't that kind of access, but we already have a system that provides access to everybody.
Okay, so I've got another question from Robert Thomas. He says, the Board of Trustees could affect some of this, but could it not also be addressed at the legislative level? For instance, a law could be passed requiring the firing of any faculty member participating in anti-American activities, such as urging on a group of protesters or denying a guest speaker the freedom to speak or inciting others to violence.
Yes, it can definitely be affected by legislation. I think something like the loyalty oath that I mentioned would probably be a legislative action. But in a lot of the day-to-day, it's the board. You want as much being handled by the board as possible. You don't want the board because you don't want a knee-jerk, like every new administration that comes in, a whole new wave of legislation occurring. The board kind of serves a function as it exists in a public university system. It exists in between the school and the legislature. It kind of cushions the school from excess politicization, or not politicization, excess politicking, shall we say.
Okay, so now we have a question coming in from John Wilson. He asks, or he says, one of the biggest problems with governance and trustees is that trustees become captive to the administration, never hearing other views and information. Shared governance is one way to fight groupthink and bring faculty voices and dissenting opinions to the trustees. Why do you oppose shared governance?
Well, he correctly assesses the asymmetry of information problem. However, he's got the wrong cure. Now, I would like trustees to have greater communication with faculty. That's in my report. There's also problems with the faculty controlling the intellectual direction of the university, because you see where it's headed today. It's not going in a good place. It's moving away from the pursuit of truth. And the board is the one that can protect that. The faculty has very many different incentives, self-interest, and so on. It has not worked, this sort of shared governance. They are not acting as a brake on the administration so much, they are acting as a brake on society. So I want to, the administration, I want to put both the administration and the faculty under the board again. That's a more fair system. That permits the outside influences to come in. That gives society a voice that they are lacking. And society needs to have a voice in our educational institutions.
Okay, let me try to get a question from someone who hasn't asked one yet. Let's see. So this one came in kind of halfway through your presentation. You hadn't gotten to your solutions yet. This questioner says, you've outlined all the problems, but no realistic solutions. You did get to some solutions, but Jay, I'll refine the question a little bit and say, what do you think are the most promising solutions that might actually happen?
Okay, well, as far my familiarity, is with the UNC system. So in the UNC system, the legislature actually created a law that says the Board of Governors can hire their own staff. Now, the board itself has never acted on this, but that is one definite possibility. There are also legal, in the literature, in the policy papers or the policies of the university. In many universities, there's an example I gave of the University of Illinois. They have the right to approve or disapprove all the hiring that goes on. Well, so they have the power. There are a lot of, so those are the two things that I thought were extremely promising.
Thank you. We've got a question came in from David Brook that I think would be of interest to all of our listeners right now. He says, this was a great presentation, one of the best I have heard. Is your report published and has it been distributed to key decision makers? How can one receive a copy? Better yet, is it online so I can share it with others? And the answer is yes, it has been published. It is online so you can share it. We will make sure to put a link, make sure that all of you have a link who have signed up for this video presentation. Ashley, I know that you're listening in right now, so I hope that you can figure out a way to get that to people as easily as possible. And we are also distributing the report widely via newsletters and online channels, as well as printed copies. Okay, I'm looking again to see if we've got any questions from people who haven't commented yet. Yes, I've got one here. Question from Jack Park. Was Mitch Daniels able to keep things straight at Purdue? If so, why? And if not, why not?
Okay, I'm not a Mitch Daniels expert. I know that he's had, I've never written on him. I mentioned him once or twice. And in fact, I think I mentioned him in here in a brief thing. Mitch Daniels has done well at Purdue. I know that he has had some struggles on the ideological end. And I mean, there's no there's no perfect policy. Yes, it would be awesome if every university could get a great president. I don't see that happening. We've been relying on presidents to be, or presidents or chancellors to be the main driver of the direction of universities in a lot of cases, and it hasn't been going well. Mitch has done a lot of things. He's done as much as he can. I don't think he's made too much inroads into the curricular end. I'm not sure. But I know that he's managed to do quite a few things. He's especially done well on the financial side.
Thank you. So we've got another question from Julia Arn. She says, how do you define academic freedom? And first, I'd say, Julia, I'll refer you to Jay's report on academic freedom. So he did write about this subject in detail, but I'll let Jay give you the summary version.
Well, the real brief one is it is the right of scholars to pursue truth in whichever direction they seem. Now, it is not that is, you know, there's a difference between academic freedom for teaching and academic freedom for research. Academic freedom for teaching is much more limited. There is not, because it comes with certain limitations that you cannot indoctrinate, these sorts of things. And I guess I'll add, I'll use the Russell-Kirk definition, which is academic freedom is a natural right that is kind of proven by the fact that man has always, throughout history, has had to know and can't be denied.
Okay, I'm scrolling through the questions again. Okay, so this one goes back to the conversation earlier about the federal government. Wouldn't you rather have some measure of control of academia in the federal government than allowing the current situation to exist?
No, flat out no. I would rather see many different, I mean, first of all, 75% of college students are in public institutions. So that's the big mover. I would prefer to see 50 different state organizations or systems rather than one federal system. That way we get the sort of, what do you call it? The laboratory of what works, what doesn't. We get to see what goes on in the blue states and in the red states. I generally like federalism because it is closer to the people themselves. Once you get a federal system under the wrong federal administration, you now have, they can blanket outlaw so many things. I mean, I fear very draconian actions by a federal government, particularly when it comes to education. So no, I do not want a federal takeover.
Okay. Okay, another one from Julia Arns. Do you think colleges are doing anything right?
I take classes. I've enjoyed the professors. I think they do some things pretty well. It depends on the individual teacher much of the time. I've had great teachers. I've had some real stinkers. They seem to be doing fairly well in the technical research. They seem to be doing pretty well in a lot of the STEM education. So there are some things that they're doing well. They're certainly not doing a good job controlling costs. That's something going on. We're seeing this this summer especially, we're seeing this flight to social justice. So, because I mean, social justice and truth are basic, diametrically opposed principles. And so we're seeing this kind of leaving the truth side of things. I see, so yes, it does some things well. I don't want to criticize everything, but in general, if it doesn't stop the bad things that are going on, the whole thing's going to go bad eventually. We're even starting to see social justice creep, kind of go in minor ways. And in fact, we have Ed Geringer here, who has commented on the intrusion of the social justice mentality into engineering. So, you know, yes, there are some things it does well. Not everything.
And we've got a question from Leslie Reynard about, is the report on academic freedom that I just referenced available online or elsewhere? And thank you for this interesting and relevant work, by the way. Leslie, the report on academic freedom is available online on our website, which is jamesgmartin.center. And this is true of all of our research. If you go and if you click on publications, you will see a list of everything that we've done. Jay, can you remind me which year the academic freedom report was?
Oh, that's about 2015, 16, I think 16.
Okay, so Leslie, if you want to find that report on academic freedom, go to publications and look for 2016. And we'll also see if there's a way for Ashley Campbell, who's running this meeting for us behind the scenes. Ashley, if you can send that to people or make that available, that would be wonderful too. Okay, we've got a question coming in saying, can the federal government use its student loan guarantee to force change?
It could. Will it? I'm thinking no. I think that I think a great deal of the federal government likes the direction higher education's going in. Not all. So I mean, I'm looking at what is. And what is the federal government does not seem to be caring about any reform of higher education whatsoever.
Okay. So I know that hiring people with arrest records and you know, a pattern of behavior that gets them arrested is already included in the UNC policy manual as reasons for, you know, not hiring someone, reasons for denying tenure, reasons for firing someone even with tenure. Why do you think that hasn't been enforced, Jay?
Oh, there was, you know, I just mentioned Dwayne Dixon. They had, UNC Chapel Hill had Howard Mochtinger on the payroll. They bounced him around. He's a former, I think he was convicted of, or he escaped conviction somehow, but he was one of the violent weathermen back in the 70s. And so there is a feeling in higher education that they want to protect a lot of people. I'm sure that if, you know, if Ed was convicted of something, he'd be gone because Ed Geringer, Ed is not Howard Mochtinger. Yeah, I think that a lot of people in higher education are down with the struggle. And if somebody is a member of a violent organization like that, they take care of them.
And we have a comment actually from Ed Geringer. He's a Purdue alumnus. Sorry, Ed. And he says that says Mitch Daniels actually did get involved in a dispute and got a faculty member to slightly walk back a statement when he was saying incorrect things about a PragerU video. So he says Mitch Daniels is taking on these issues. Maybe he just isn't getting as much attention for it as he is for his financial changes there.
Okay, yeah, entirely possible. Like I said, I'm not the expert on Mitch.
Okay, let me see what else we've got. There's a lot to scroll through. I think you've probably covered this well, but what is it about social justice that you think is problematic as a motivating force for a university or a board of trustees?
I think it is a specific political attitude that it aligns itself with socialism. It is part of it defies tradition. It defies the wisdom of the past. It wants to sweep away our current system or our civilization even. And frankly, as civilizations go, and ours is horrible until you compare it with all the rest. I think that we have had, the United States, for the most part, has been a fairly equitable society. It's been a prosperous society. It's been a free society when you compare it with all the others that have ever existed. So, and I see the social justice movement is trying to totally destroy it. So I got a few problems with it.
Okay, well, thank you, Jay, and thank you for all of our webinar participants today. We will follow up with those links to Jay's most recent report as well as academic freedom for everyone who attended today. Again, thank you for being here, and we hope you'll stay in touch. You can email us anytime at info@jamesgmartin.center. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook, or sign up for our newsletters, and we hope that you will. Thanks again, and everybody have a wonderful afternoon.